46b, last line on the page. Okay, this is an interesting scenario. Omer Rabba, Omer Rav Huna. So Rabba says the name of Rav Huna. Mocher li pe'elu kana v'yesh li olav eno. Kana afagav t'lei moshach. Kiven lekapet kana d'ki chalipin dami. What exactly happened? The guy took money in his hand. You know, it was like a kid's game. He had an unknown amount of money in his hands. He said, "Would you sell it to me for this amount of money?" You know, and the guy said, "Yeah, it's a deal." So it works. It's a valid kinyan. The yeshli olav eno. What does that mean? So we'll talk about eno in this parak. We'll talk about it later today and later on in the parak. Eno, the verse says, "Lo sainu ishes amitu." Don't do sainu. Sainu means eno. What is eno? Eno is either to overcharge or underdeliver. Eno goes both ways. It's the buyer could overcharge the seller, or the seller could take too much, could undercut the buyer. And what's the number? The number is a sixth, 16.7%. So if the sale isn't within 16.7% of market value, it's called a no. And therefore, so the way it works is as follows. If it was exactly 16.7%, so kano machzor no, the kinyan works and you give back the 16.7% that you overcharged. If it's less than 16.7%, the sale's valid as is. You can charge 15% more. That's fine. And if it's more than 16.7%, then the sale's invalid. Now, it's not quite as simple as that, because in order to effect the laws of Ainah, you sort of have to immediately invalidate the sale. Okay. For example, if the guy bought a lawnmower, the market value is $50. He spent $75, right? It's clearly overcharged. Mm-hmm. So his friends, he meets his friend in the street. His friend says, $70 for a lawnmower, it's $50. So he says, okay, I appreciate it. I'm going to go back and get a refund. And then he stops off in the pizza shop on the way back. Then he's not entitled to a refund. Noah has to be refunded immediately. As soon as you find out about it, you go back, you get your money back. Okay. Fine. Now, basically the guy, remember, the scenario is the guy's holding money in his hand. How much money? Nobody knows. So Rav and Rav Huna say the kinyan is valid. That's fine. The guy's making a deal for that amount of money. The yesh le'ol of Ainah, meaning that there is the law of Ainah. The law of Ainah is in effect. What's interesting though, meaning that there has to be commensurate value to what the sale is taking place. So he's buying a lawnmower. There's approximately $50, give or take. What is it? $5 or so, $6, whatever it is. Okay, up to 7, I think it is. Okay, fine. Now, kana afagav d'lei moshach. This is an interesting one. Remember, yesterday, past 2 days, we were drum beating that that when you sell something, money does not govern the transaction. It's meshicha. It's moving the item. However, in this scenario, Rav and Rav Huna say kana afagav d'lei moshach. Even though you didn't do Mashiach, you still acquire it. The kivan d'lei kapid kana d'ki chalipin dami. Since obviously the guy is not looking too hard at what's in the guy's hand, so therefore it's much similar. It's similar to chalipin, and it doesn't require Mashiach. Okay, v'yesh le'ol of Ainah, and there's Ainah. Why? Because it was ultimately speaking, it's a sale. If it's a sale, there is Ainah. Okay, so Rav Abba Amar Rav Huna, 1 second. Rav Abba Amar Rav Huna, so Rav Abba says the name of Rav Huna. So first we had Rabba quoting Rav Huna. Now we have Rav Abba quoting Rav Huna. Mocher li be'elu kana, v'ein lo olav Ainah. So Rav Abba disagrees slightly with Rabba. He says the kinyan works, but there is no Ainah. The Gemara says, okay. Shita, damin v'ein makbid aleim, hakamin de kanin de kechalipin dami. We said if there's a sale, then 1 second. And the guy doesn't know what's included in the sale. we say the kinyan works. Meaning I'm selling you, I'm buying your lawnmower for the money that's in my hand. That's a valid kinyan. And obviously it has to be within the right range, but not exactly. However, what's the story? Chalipin umakbid aleim. Mai. Let's say a guy does chalipin, but he's insistent that the value be equal. So typically we say, like for example, we'll talk more about the story of Rus, right? In Megillus Rus, we have a story of Boaz redeeming the property from Anonymous, right? We call him the Goyal, and we're playing the Almighty. So what does he do over there? It's sort of a token relationship, right? Somebody, either we'll talk about who it is in a moment, somebody gives their shoe, and Boaz acquires all of the properties with that shoe. Okay, now, in that case, clearly the shoe isn't worth the estate. Now, what happens if they try to do chalipin of equal? So this is sort of like a barter. The chalipin of Boaz wasn't a barter. The chalipin of Boaz wasn't fair, wasn't equal. It was a small token amount for everything. Let's say, on the other hand, we have two people. They're trying to barter something. Two things. So one guy gives a donkey and the other guy gives a cow. And they want the value to be equal. What's the story? Would the kinyan be valid if the values were unequal? Sort of, can you have chalipin that's like a sale? Just like a sale, if they both, they want the sale to be fair and, legitimate, then if they have to, the buyer has to provide the money that's roughly equivalent to the value of the item being sold. And the seller in the same way has to provide something roughly the value of the money that's being given. Is that the same? Is that true of chalipin as well? What's the story? Amar of Ada bar Avo. We are on 47a, about a quarter of the way down, less than a quarter of the way down. Tashma, let's examine this. So guy was holding his, we're on 47a. We're at Tashma. A few lines down. So there's this fellow. He was holding Typhus Parasa. He was holding his ox in the marketplace. And he was standing there. So he walks to his friend. He sees his friend. The guy's holding the ox in the marketplace. His friend stops by. He says, "I don't need a cow. I need a donkey." So the guy says to him, "Okay, fine, deal. Yesh chamori. I've got a donkey. Shani nice and I'll give it to you." So they sort of agreed to barter a donkey for a cow. Okay, and each one said, "What's the value of your donkey?" It's $100. What's the value of the cow? It's also $100. Okay. Okay, so what happens here? The one guy pulled the donkey, right? He did Mashiach on the donkey. I'm sorry, he did Mashiach on the cow, but then the donkey died. Before the guy has a chance to get his donkey, the donkey died. So the question is the kinyan valid or not? So the Brisa says, Loi kana bal chamor sapara. The owner of the donkey does not acquire the cow. He can change his mind. Shmamina, we see from here, that this seems to be 1 second. That this is an example of chalipin where they want the values to be equal, and in this case they're not equal because the donkey died, so therefore the kinyan is not valid. So Amarava ought to chalipin b'shuftani askin lekapti al kol chalipin mikbid kapti. The kana. Okay, so Rava points out that when chalipin is used in barter, we said there's two examples of chalipin. Chalipin is sometimes a token kinyan. We are clearly there's the gap in the value is massive. It's too big to even call it a gap. It's using a pen to acquire $1 million.
It's a symbol.
Exactly, it's symbolic. Very good, thank you. However, there is another type of chalipin which is roughly equal, where the items are roughly equal. Now,
47A, which line, first word in the line, Rabbi?
Rova,
Okay, Rabbi.
Otu chalipin, about a quarter of the way, a little more than a quarter of the way down.
Okay,
So,
Rava, Ito. Yeah.
Otu, yeah. Otu chalipin b'shiftani askin like kapi, like chalipin mikveh kapi v'kana. Okay, so now we said there's the symbolic chalipin, and then there's the actual barter. Where now every chalipin is roughly speaking, every chalipin that's not symbolic is roughly speaking a barter. And Rav is saying, obviously, what you think we're talking about cheats, that every time somebody's cheating somebody else, of course, they want the barter to be roughly equal.
Mm-hmm.
And the kinyan works. So clearly chalipin works, even if they want the chalipin of barter of, roughly speaking, two equal items, clearly is a valid kinyan. And clearly, presumably, they want the value to be roughly the same. So clearly chalipin does work as a kinyan, even as a non-token act. As a barter. Okay, so of course, every chalipin they want every barter of every barter type of chalipin, they want it to be equal value, and the kinyan is still valid. What are we referring here? Okay, so there's a catch to the story. What's the catch to the story? It wasn't a trade for a donkey to a cow. The guy with the donkey wanted the cow plus a sheep, and he only acquired the cow and not the sheep. So actually, the kinyan never finished, and therefore, because the donkey suddenly dies, the kinyan is the transaction is withdrawn. It isn't complete because it was never completed. Okay, so we saw we saw in the beginning of today, first few minutes, a guy basically has money in his hand, and he says, I'd like to buy your cup for what's in my hand, this amount of money. So we said the kinyan works, Kamma, the kinyan works. I give you the money. Now the cup is mine. Even though normally speaking, kinyan kesef doesn't work, right? Money does not work to acquire. In this case, it does work. We'll have to talk about that. Why? The yeshle olav anah, and it has the restriction of anah. So anah, like we explained before, is either overcharging or under delivering, and the critical number is a sixth. Okay, so Gemara says, 1 second. Why does the kinyan work as kinyan kesef? We said as soon as the seller picks up the handful of money, which doesn't know how much is in it, then the lawnmower gets sold. Well, why is that? Presumably it's chalipin. 1 second. If it's chalipin, what are we doing chalipin on? We're doing chalipin on money. So lema savar of Huna mat be'enas chalipin. So clearly Rav Huna holds that you could do chalipin on coins. The coin is the shoe of chalipin here. So Gemara says, "Like Rav Huna savar l'krivyechanan d'amar dvar Torah mois kindness." So we'll go. This we saw yesterday, and we'll see it again later today. No, what's going on here is Rav Huna holds the Rabbi Yehudah that says that the truth of the matter is that money is a good kinyan. When you hand over money, you acquire the item that's being bought. When the seller acquires the coins, the buyer acquires the item. That's the technical law. It's only the rabbis that came around and undid that. The rabbis made it dependent on the buyer acquiring the item being sold. And the reason for that is, which we'll learn about more later today. We're concerned here that the seller will not rescue the property belonging to the buyer in case of fire. So therefore, we require the buyer to take possession of the item being sold. So now, says Rav Yehudah, this is true only in a normal type of kinyan, because the rabbis only make decrees for normative behavior. However, a guy who sells money he sells something for the money in his hand, that's deviant behavior, right? It's sort of out of the normal realm. It's out of the normal realm. Nobody does that. And therefore, the rabbinical decree is no longer in effect. And we go back to the technical requirement, which is money. So because the money was transacted, the item now belongs to the buyer. Even though normally we don't allow money, we don't say that money governs a sale. but this is not normative, and therefore money does govern the sale in this scenario. Okay, Rav Huna Savla Rav Yechon, he goes to the opinion of Rav Yechon. The Amr Dvar Torah is kindness that he says, biblically speaking, technically, money works to complete a sale, just transacting the money. Why do the rabbis reject that and say you must bring the item being sold into your possession? So that the seller doesn't say, sorry, but your stuff got burnt. Because the seller is not going to have his stuff. Because the rabbis decreed that the stuff will now be in the domain of the buyer in order for the sale to be consummated.
But the coins,
The coins are the currency.
Yeah.
The item being sold is the lawnmower.
it doesn't get, there's no destruction of the coins.
Again, the seller, the guy receiving the currency is the seller, right?
Okay.
So the seller in this case agreed to sell a lawnmower for a handful of coins, which he didn't know what was in the handful. So it's literally in the guy's hand, and he doesn't know what's in it. So the seller is the guy selling the lawnmower. The buyer is the one paying a handful of money. So now, under normal circumstances, technically speaking, as soon as the buyer hands over the money, the lawnmower belongs to him. Therefore, if there's a fire, you can be assured that the seller will say, your lawnmower, sorry, got burnt. However, the rabbi said, therefore, don't do that. Money's not going to work. You could change your mind until you bring the lawnmower home. And then not quite. You don't have to actually bring it home, but you have to pull it out of the guy's shop. So that sort of puts the onus on you now if you decide to roll it back into the shop after you took it out. Now, the rabbis only enacted that with normal sales. This is abnormal because the guy is holding an unknown quantity of money. So therefore, Milsa Shicha, a normal type of sale, goes Rabbanan, that you have to actually bring the lawnmower into your possession by pulling it. Umilsa Lo Shicha, an unusual scenario where the guy is handing over an unknown quantity of money, Lo goes Rabbanan, the rabbis did not decree, and therefore we're back to the original law that handing over the money is sufficient to consummate the kinyan. That now the lawnmower belongs to the buyer. Amrle Marhuna Breder of Nachman Rav Ashi. So Marhuna, the son of Rav Nachman, says to Rav Ashi, Atan Hakim Masnisalu law, Anan Hakim Masnina law. We had the version of the Gemara slightly different. Rav Huna says that you cannot use a coin cannot serve as the shoe of Chalipin. And that concludes the first segment of the Gemara. Now we get to the next segment of the Gemara. This is a question I believe that Donna Kuttner was asking before, or at least it's pretty close to that question on Shabbos. Okay, so in other words, we have the shoe here, right? So whose shoe is it? So remember, we have Boaz. He's acquiring the property of Elimelech from the Goyal, from the Redeemer. Well, the Redeemer's name also is Pliny Almighty, which literally means anonymous. We don't know what his name is. So Boaz is acquiring the field from anonymous, and they agreed that a shoe was transacted, and by that shoe being transacted, all of Elimelech's fields now belong to Boaz. Whose shoe is it? Was it anonymous's shoe, the seller, or was it Boaz's shoe, the buyer? So in other words, did Boaz take off his shoe and hand it over to the seller, anonymous, who picked up the shoe? And by picking up the shoe, now he transfers all of the estate of Elimelech to Boaz. Or was the opposite? The anonymous person took off his shoe, gave it to Boaz. Boaz picked up the shoe, and by Boaz picking up the shoe, he picked up the shoe and also everything else, all the estate of Elimelech. Together on the question? So the names of the people here, whatever not the names, the terms that were described the people is the makna and the kaina. In this case, the anonymous person, he was the true redeemer. He was the true owner of Elimelech's fields. So he is the makna, he's the seller. And Boaz is the acquirer, he's the kaina, the buyer. So it's the makna and the kaina. So Rav Amar b'kelev shel kaina, it's the buyer's shoe, meaning Boaz. Boaz is the buyer, the acquirer. So what happens? Boaz took off his shoe, and anonymous picked it up, and by picking up Boaz's shoe, he agrees to transfer all of his property to Boaz. So this is like a sale, sort of, right? The shoe is like the money, right? And the estate it's being transferred is the item being sold. Okay, the Levi Amar Levi says, the Kollel Shalmakna could be in Lamem or Kamma, like we'll detail in a moment. Okay, so he says that what actually happened. Anonymous took off his shoe, gave it to Boaz. Boaz picked up the shoe, and by picking up the shoe, he acquired all of Elimelech's field. This is like what we call Kinyan Agav. We spoke about Kinyan Agav a couple of days ago. We spoke about it in the past in the Kamma at length. Agav is where you buy one thing, and typically Agav is as follows. If I buy a property, I could buy all sorts of things and attach it to the property. So I could add your car and your boat, even if they're not in the driveway. Right? I could add all the stuff you have in the warehouse too. By me acquiring the house, I acquire all those stuff. So similarly, the seller, the anonymous, took off his shoe. Boaz picks up his shoe, and by picking up his shoe, he acquires not only the shoe, but all the estate. Okay. So they don't. I'm sorry. So Rav Huna doesn't like this. Doesn't like the story of Levi. Why? Because what happens is you're using a coat to acquire property, using the shoe to acquire the estate, and that doesn't work. Why? Because the mission is very. Now this mission actually is talking about Kinyan Agav, the Kinyan we just described, which is exactly how we described it before. You have to use property to acquire barrels of wine in a cellar somewhere, not the other way around. You cannot use barrels of wine to acquire property. But over here, it sounds like that the shoe of anonymous is being used to acquire the property. It doesn't work. Agav does not work that way. You have to use responsible property that can carry a lien, which is real estate, to acquire movable items, not movable items to acquire real estate. Real estate nickname being acquired by non-real estate, by movable items. We learned the opposite. That real estate can acquire movable items, but movable items can't acquire real estate. So if Levi was here, he would come out with you with a fiery whip, and he'd whip you up with it.
Isn't that a curse?
Yeah, so pulsa denura literally means a fiery whip. In Kabbalistical terms, a pulsa denura is a spiritual curse. Yeah, same language. We also had it in my cotton, if you remember, about a little over 3 years ago. We were what was it? It was Acher. It was Acher who went in. He saw the matat. He said something he wasn't supposed to say, and they whipped him up with a fiery whip. Okay. Anyway. Okay. So in other words, basically you're totally wrong. Why are you that's in English what he's saying. You know, if Levi was going to whip you with a fiery whip, you're obviously clearly wrong. Why are you wrong? Do you think that the shoe is the agent of acquiring the estate? No, the shoe is symbolic. The point is, it's with the enjoyment that you got the shoe, that's how you get the whole estate. What happens is the shoe is the symbol that I'm using to sell you the whole property.
Doesn't matter whose shoe it is.
So, and this again is the shoe of the shoe of in this version, it's the shoe of anonymous, of the seller, so-called seller. So the shoe serves much more as a token relationship than as a than as the agent of acquisition. So when you use property to acquire wine barrels, the property is the agent. It's not a token. Over here, the code is not the agent; it's just a token. Okay, Kitanoi. This is like the following debate, a similar debate of Tanah. This is the verse in Megillas Rus. This is the law in Israel. Ala geula on redemption. Ala tumura. Tumura is exchange. L'kayim kol davar, to fulfill any matter. In English, what this means here is to sort of seal a transaction, to transact something, to execute something. What do you do? Shlaf ishnaloi. One guy takes off his shoe, and he gives it to his friend. And then the end of the verse is V'zais ha'tu'uda b'Yisrael. This is a tu'uda. This is a certificate, meaning this is how we certify an event. This is how we execute, we consummate a transaction. Okay, so let's interpret this verse now. Geula, redemption. What does that mean? Zumachira, that's a sale. Lo yigoel. The verse refers to a sale as geula, as redemption. Tamura, in exchange, zuchalipin. This is kinyan chalipin. Lo yachlifenu v'lo yomer, I say. So we talk about tamura exchange as yachlifenu, as chalipin. L'kayim called over to fulfill any transactional matter. Shlaf ishnala v'nosan l're'eu. One guy takes off his shoe and hands it to his friend. Mi nosan l'mi. Who gave the shoe to who? So Gemara says, Boaz nosan l'goyel. Boaz took off his shoe and gave it to the Redeemer, anonymous. Rabbi Yehudah says, no, the opposite. Goyel nosan l'Boaz. The Redeemer, anonymous, gave it to Boaz. Tana, we learned. Kainin b'kli alf b'shein b'shav pruta. The shoe of chalipin, it could be any vessel, and it doesn't have to be worth a shav pruta, a quarter or a nickel. It could be totally, as long as it's useful, even if it's worthless. Okay, Rav Nachman. This is the Rav Nachman we saw the past 2 days. What does Rav Nachman say? Lo yishanol b'kli. You need to specifically use a vessel. Aval b'peri, but if you use a commodity, an apple, loy, does not work for the shoe of chalipin. Rav Sheshes says, afilu b'peris, even if you use commodities. My time with Rav Nachman. What's the reasoning of Rav Nachman? The verse says naloi. It has to be a shoe. Naloi in midyachin loy. The shoe is an example of a vessel. It's useful. So you have to give a useful thing. 1 second. My time to Rav Sheshes. What's the reasoning of Rav Sheshes? Amar Krala Kayim called over to fulfill any transactional matter. So Rav Sheshes means any transactional matter means that sort of anything can serve as the shoe of the transaction of chalipin. Meaning it could be commodity, it could be an apple, it could be an orange, or it could be a pen. I think the rabbi here uses a pen. If anyone sold a chametz to the rabbi, especially with a paper, a cell phone, that also works. Any useful item is used. Some rabbis will actually have a kerchief that's 3x3. Some of them will have a pen. A cell phone works also, and that is, by the way, an example of chalipin. By picking up the pen, you give the rabbi all of your chametz. Okay.
It has to be his pen in that case. It has to be the rabbi's pen.
Yeah, so that halachically speaking, we say that it's kelev shel kaina. So the rabbi's acquiring the pen, so he gives you the pen. Yeah. Did he keep his phone or not?
No, he said I'd have to answer all his calls.
Very good, very good. Okay. 1 second, hold on. Okay, so the Gemara says Rav Nachman Ami Aksiv Kaim called over. Rav Nachman also, the verse is expansive. It says to fulfill any matter. So the Gemara says Ahula Kaim called over the nickname b'manal, meaning that everything could be acquired with the shoe, but not that everything works as the shoe. You need a shoe, and a shoe works to acquire anything. Which is, by the way, the simple explanation of the verse is much more implied, like Rav Nachman in that context. Rav Sheshes nami aksiv na'alei. What does Rav Sheshes do with the fact that the verse specifically mentions a shoe? Rav Sheshes ma na'alei davar mesuyim af kol davar mesuyim. It has to be something that's complete. La'afuke chatzi riman v'chatzi egos. If you give a guy a half a walnut, right? No good. No good. You have to give him a full item. Half a pomegranate is not going to work either. You have to give him a full apple. The light doesn't work. Okay, so today in our documents, we often use chalipin to execute a document, and the language we use here is b'mona de kosher l'miknebe. What does that mean? B'mona, I'll translate it literally and then we'll explain. B'mona means with an item, de kosher, that's kosher, l'mikne, to acquire bay in it. 4 limitations. B'mona with an item, what does that mean? Lafuka midir sheshes. You need to use something useful. It can't, not like Rav Sheshes. You can't use an apple. To Amar Kaina Paris. To kosher, it has to be kosher. What does that mean? Lafuka midir shmuel and to Amar Kainin b'meruka. To kosher means it has to be something that's respectable, as opposed to meruka. Meruka are vessels that are made with the excrement of animals. Clearly, not exactly a kosher item. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Yes. Limikne, to acquire. What does that mean? Lafuka midir levi. The opposite of Levi. We do not rule like Levi. It has to be the vessels of the kaina, of the acquirer. In the case of the rabbi's buying a chametz, you use his vessels. 1 second. Levi the Amar B'Kelev Shel Makna. One second. One second. One second. Okay. It has to be that the buyer hands it to the seller, that by the seller acquiring the item, he hands over the estate. So that's what it means. Lamikne. It has to be that the buyer hands it to the seller. Okay. Bay in it. What does that mean? Specifically excluding a coin. Coin cannot serve as the vehicle of chalipin. Zvid says the name of Rabashi. If the item is prohibited to derive benefit, can't be used for chalipin either. Ikeda Amri, some say. Bay Amra Papa Lamutim at Bea, the kosher. Bay meaning that a vessel is being used to acquire it, and not a coin, but a coin would also be kosher. So according to Papa, Matbea could be used for chalipin. Amr Zvivi Tamer Rabashi Lamuti Yisur Hino Al Marikale Yitzrach. Rav Zvid said it's coming to exclude vessels that are prohibited to derive benefit. A vessel made of excrement, it is not necessary to specifically exclude it. It's obvious that you can't use that as the token element of chalipin. Okay, an asimain acquires a matbea. What is an asimain? A matbea is a coin, a regular coin that's struck. It has an imprint on it. Okay, so an asimain could be used to acquire coins. An asimain would be considered again the commodity against the coins, which are the currency. But what is an asimain? My asimain. The first version of an asimain is Amar Rav Mois Hanidnois Besimin LeBeis HaMerchatz. So this is sort of like a token in the figurative sense, not in the literal sense. Meaning, let's say you want to count people, so you ask each person to put a token into the box. So they would would try to figure out how many people were using the bath. So each person would put a token into a cup, and the owner of the bathhouse would count the amount of tokens, and then he'd heat the bath accordingly. So an asimain is a token. Obviously, what's a token? The most useless of coins, right? The coin that's barely usable. That's obviously, instead of using it as a coin, you use it as a token. Okay, so the Gemara says Meisvei ein mechal and ma'aser sheni al asimain v'lo amoyis and atonis b'simon l'beis hamarchatz. The Mishnah says you cannot redeem ma'aser sheni on an asimain or on a coin that's used as a token in the bathhouse. Well, clearly, it's two separate things. An asimain is not the token of the bathhouse, because they're listed as two separate items. Clearly, an asimain is not the token of the bathhouse. And if you'll say that actually we're explaining what is an asimain, it is the token of the bathhouse. That can't be. Why? It can't be that way. Why not? Because the Mishnah says, you can redeem ma'aser sheni on an asimain. Ma'aser sheni could be redeemed on an asimain according to the opinion of Rabbi Dovid. The rabbis say it doesn't work. And everyone agrees that you cannot redeem it on bathhouse tokens. So clearly here, an asimain, which we don't know what it is yet, that's a debate. But the bathhouse token, that doesn't work. So clearly an asimain is not the bathhouse token. So what is an asimain? Okay, what is an asimain? It's pulsa. Pulsa is a blank. It is a blank coin. It doesn't have an imprint on it. It was never struck. And Rabbi Yehudah goes according to his own opinion. Rav Dovid and Rabbi Shmuel said the same thing. Rav Dovid, that which we just saw. Rav Dovid says you can redeem ma'aser sheni, the tithe that goes to Jerusalem, can be redeemed on an asimain, a blank coin. And Rabbi Shmuel said the same thing. What did Rabbi Shmuel say? It's called over hanitz Rabbi Yadiv Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says any type of coin, including a blank. And Rabbi Kiva says, no, it has to have an imprint on it. It doesn't have an imprint, you cannot use it to redeem it ma'aser sheni. So an asimain again is a blank coin, and according to Rabbi Dovid and Rabbi Shmuel, you can redeem ma'aser sheni on an asimain. According to other opinions, you can't. Regardless, a blank coin is considered a commodity when you compare it when it's being transacted together with a real coin, an imprinted coin. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Ketzan, Moshech Yimenu Paris, Lenos Lemois, Eini Yachol Asarei. Okay. So the guy does Mashiach on the coins, on the item, then the transaction is completed. So we have a buyer and a seller, right? The seller is selling a lawnmower, the buyer handing him over $50. As soon as the buyer pulls the lawnmower, the sale is transacted. Even if the buyer even if he didn't pay, or if the buyer paid the money but didn't pull the lawnmower out, the sale is still not consummated. And the buyer can still change his mind, except that if you do, God will punish you. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. Okay, but technically speaking, you're allowed to do this. Okay. Amar V'Yechanan. So now we get back to the Gemara, which we've been discussing constantly. We haven't seen the original Gemara. Here is the original Gemara. Rabbi Yehudah says, Dvar Torah mois kainas. Biblically speaking, money works for transaction. Why did they say that you need to actually pull the item that's being acquired? There's a concern that the seller might say, sorry, but your lawnmower was burnt. The Gemara says, well, who cares? Maybe whoever lit the fire is going to have to pay for the lawnmower. So the guy will get the money for the lawnmower either way. Why does he really care if the lawnmower burnt? The concern here is maybe there'll be a fire and there will be no one at fault. Okay, therefore, if the fire happened on its own or whatever, there's no guilty party. So if there's no guilty party, if the seller still owns the lawnmower, you can be assured he'll move it out of the house because he doesn't want the lawnmower to burn.
Mm-hmm.
The Eloi, 1 second. However, if he doesn't own the lawnmower, he's not going to work hard to save the lawnmower. He'll let it burn in the fire because who cares? It belongs to somebody else. Rish Lakish says, Mashiach is the way to acquire things min haTorah. Biblically speaking, there is no method of acquiring things using money. It doesn't work. You have to actually pull the item. You have to bring it into your possession. My time of Rish Lakish. What's the reasoning of Rish Lakish? Omar Kra, the verse says, this verse, by the way, is talking about I know. So in other words, the verse says, if you buy something from your friend, don't steal him, don't overcharge him by overcharging or under-delivering more than 16.7%, 1/6. Okay, Amar Kra, to read the verse. If you buy something from your friend, or you buy it miyad from his hand. What does that mean? That means you actually have to take the item from his hand, meaning you have to pull the item, the lawnmower out of the shop. Rabbi Yehudah says, miyad from his hand, Rabbi Yehudah says it's actually nothing to do with Mashiach. It has to do that the laws of Ainah are not in effect with regard to property. Now, there's a little caveat there. The reason why the laws of Ainah are not in effect in property is because there could be property that's worth much more to one person over the next person, right? So, for example, my father knows a guy who was he happened to have the good fortune of living next to a very, very wealthy Jew, and one day the Jew decided to double the size of his house, so he wanted to buy the property that was next door, and of course he overpaid $500,000 for this guy my father knows property. This guy was a very simple guy, low income, and all of a sudden he landed himself $500,000 because he happened to be the neighbor of. Because if you're the neighbor, that property might actually be worth an extra $500,000.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the market value of the property, but it is your value of the property. Now there is an exception to that. Meaning that property by and large does not have the laws of Ainah. If you overcharge or underdeliver for property, that's perfectly acceptable. Except in one condition, where the property is sold in a unit of measurement. So like farmland that's being sold by the acre, where sort of the guy has a large plot, you get 1,000 acres, he has to charge then market value.
Will that help Trump?
What was that?
Will that help Trump
yeah.
over?
Okay, let's say no. Rish Lakish imken lechter kravachi simkru memker miyad amisecha al toinu oikana lamali shmamina l'mashicha. So Rish Lakish points out that the verse says oikana, or that it was sold, meaning that there's two ideas here. One is that you need mashicha. Number two is that property is not included in the laws of Ainah. Rabbi Yochanan oikana my avadle. What does Rabbi Yochanan do with that extra verse? Mibaylik the tanya v'chisimkru memker al sainu eli el shenis ana lekech it's ana moicher minayin taman leimer oikana al toinu. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan learns that the laws of Ainah go for both the buyer and the seller. We'll finish in a moment. Rish Lakish tarti gomer minei. And Rish Lakish learns both concepts. He learns Rish Lakish uses the same verse to learn three ideas. Number one, that Mashicha is the proper way to do kinyan. You need to pull the item. Number two, Ainah is not an effect for property, which is together with Rabbi Yochanan. And number three is Ainah is an effect both for buyers and sellers. Neither sellers can cheat the buyer, nor buyers can cheat the sellers. Ainah would be an effect in both positions. So we'll continue tomorrow.
Ashkoff.
Have a great day.
Where did the 1/6?
1/6 is the amount of Ainah. The law of Ainah is that you can't cheat. How much is called cheating?
In biblical, is that biblical term?
It's a good question. It's probably a biblical derivation. How exactly it's derived from, I have to go.